Welcome back to Punchline. Thank you for staying with us. We want to discuss corruption and impunity in Kenya. My guests tonight, Ndegwa Njiru and Charles Kanjama. Thank you both for being with us on the program, and we'll be speaking to both very shortly, but I want to kick it off with this. Kirinyaga Governor Anne Waiguru is back in the eye of the storm after anti-corruption detectives raided her homes in Nairobi and Kirinyaga this week, interrogating staff and searching for documents. EACC is said to be investigating allegations that Governor Waiguru and other county staff were paid travel allowances amounting to 23 million shillings for non-existent trips. At the same time, outrage persists over the allegations of corruption at Kemsa over COVID-19 funds. Does President Kenyatta have the resolve necessary to crack the whip? Well, back on the program, as I mentioned, is lawyer Ndegwa Njiru, who has been acting for MCAs, and we must also point out at this point that we did reach out to the governor's defense team but got no positive response. But as they say, the show must go on. All right, Charles Kanjama joins us a little later. Welcome to you both. And let me start with you, Councillor Njiru.
Yes.
On this note, I can only suppose that you are welcoming the development by the EACC to investigate the governor on the travel allowances. But this isn't the first time that she has been investigated by EACC and nothing came out of it.
Yes.
It's, for all we can tell, just another investigation that we don't know will end up anywhere. So my question is, so what?
And allow me to, first of all, pass my regards for this invitation for this interview to the house, the media house, but also allow me also to do a bit of editing and amending of your scripts as you read it, that Anne Waiguru is back in the storm. She has never been out of the storm since the time we have known her and since the time we got to know her in the public service. She has always been in that storm. I think she cherished all the time that she's in the storm. And for the wrong reasons.
Why would you say that? That's a bit of a personal...
No, I'm not being personal, Anne. The fact is that we still have unresolved issues with her. Remember, the NYS one has never been resolved to date. Now we are in another issue of Kirinyaga County, which has still not been resolved. So when I speak, I am actually speaking as an advocate who has been representing the MCAs in Kirinyaga County. But remember, the MCAs are also the representatives of the people. So when I speak here, I am actually speaking on behalf of majority of the Kirinyaga County residents who shares my sentiments that Kirinyaga County, and that is what the people are saying, we do not want it to be like another NYS, an issue that just goes unresolved. So we are simply saying that from the Senate, where we were able to bring substantive evidence, despite the fighting that was done by the Senate, you can see now there's another unfolding. Remember, Anne, at the Senate, we had raised an issue of 10 million having been misappropriated, having been embezzled by the governor. And remember, there was a positive finding by the Senate that indeed there was money that got lost. There was money that was not appropriated as prescribed by the law. But despite that finding, the Senate again shied away from giving a penalty for that particular issue. So we are then saying that the EACC should not be another cleansing process. And I did tweet today, actually I tweeted today and I think on Friday, that the EACC must be warned. I did a caveat emptor. They must be warned that the trajectory in which they are taking, that they might meet a more stronger sanitizer and cleansing process than it was in the Senate. Why are we saying this, and why are Kenyans apprehensive? Kenyans are apprehensive with the processes because not once, not twice, issues have been raised about this public servant. Issues of corruption have been raised about this public state officer, but nothing has been done. And that is why we are saying we are going to get tired of these episodes. We are going to get tired of these tales if nothing comes out of it.
But, you know, there is something called due process. So,
yes.
I mean, it doesn't matter how much one complains about a public servant. It's about the evidence that you can bring. The Senate took the view that you failed to prove your case against her, and now EACC appears to have picked it up, zeroing in on the alleged, as you have said, non-existent trips. What is it that is new or otherwise that you believe will make a difference now?
There's absolutely nothing new in this issue. For example, for one reason, Anne, the EACC does not need to find Waiguru culpable for having embezzled the alleged 23 million. there was a positive finding that 1.5 million Kenyan shilling was misappropriated, was banked in someone's personal account, was not surrendered pursuant to the expiry of 7 days as prescribed by the law. That finding itself is substantive to have Waiguru charged in court of law to answer to those charges. And then we are saying, Anne, Kenyans should not even lose one single coin. One single coin is so much money for Kenyans to lose. So corruption and theft of public resources does not rather amount to stealing. When someone has stolen a large sum of money, even one single coin is not contemplated by law as money that ought to be lost.
All right. There are those who claim that the timing of this raid is suspect and is an attempt to draw attention away from corruption allegations facing Kemsa and others. I don't know why you're laughing. On the alleged looting, let me finish my question, alleged looting of COVID-19 funds and equipment, your response beyond the humor.
And, you know, the last time was before you on this station, I said that our governor has perfected the art of playing victim every time she's called to account. And you can see by virtue of the press conference that she issued on that day, when she was being pursued by the ACC, she said, you know, guys, it's just a diversionary tactics. What are we saying? We are saying there is no lesser thief and there is no greater thief. A thief is a thief. A person who has stolen from public scoffers is as good as a person who has stolen billions. So what are we saying? There is no classification or categorization of public theft. Kemsa is a money heist, and Kirinyaga County funds is also a money heist. There is no ranking of greater evil and lesser evil. And today I give you an example. If you are driving a V8, and it gets stolen, and someone else steals a chicken, the law contemplates or defines that offense as theft and doesn't look at the quantity of the amount that has been stolen or the item that has been stolen. The law just says this is theft. And so it is, even in the Economic and Crimes Act. It does not classify that because in the Kemsa case we have lost billions, and in Kirinyaga case we are saying we have lost 23 million, that one is greater than the other. There is no classification of public theft. All right,
yes. A fair point. And again, I want to just say for good measure that we did invite the Governor's Council to the program, and we did not get a positive result on that. But be that as it may, join me now is lawyer Charles Kanjama. Charles, your take on the latest raid on the governor, and do you see deflection and politics in all of this? She has previously also alleged that powerful individuals in the government were behind her woes, and that this is also a way to turn attention away from Kemsa. Your thoughts?
First, I would say that the allegations that have been made about corruption in Kemsa are very distressing to Kenyans, because that is grand corruption or grand larceny. It involves billions of Kenya shillings. It involves Kenyans' health. People's lives are at stake, and even other aid that is coming into the country on matters of health is now endangered because of the Kemsa allegations. We've seen medical personnel, doctors, nurses on strike because they don't have sufficient personal protective equipment and so on. So the Kemsa allegations are very grave, and the country needs to focus on them. However, I don't believe that we cannot focus on several investigations into graft or corruption allegations at the same time. In fact, I think that the agencies that have been charged with investigating corruption, key among them being the Ethics Anti-Corruption Commission and the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, must ensure that they have sufficient capacity to pursue all these cases of corruption concurrently and to get results. And of course, it is only when someone is proven guilty in a court of law that you can say that they are guilty. Before that, they may at most be suspects.
Right.
So we also have to recognize the presumption of innocence for those who are under investigation. But the investigative agencies must do their job.
All right, just before we go a little further, I'd just like your thoughts on the performance of EACC, and that's a question I've posed to you, Njiro, and if I heard you correctly, you are not sounding that too confident, hence the reason you fired a warning online. Charles, what are your thoughts on the performance of EACC? Even now, it has been claimed that they were already investigating impropriety at Kemsa at the time that alleged looting may have taken place. Is this an institution that Kenyans can, put their confidence in?
I think there are several institutions that form part of the supply chain or value chain of fighting corruption. EACC is one of them. Their output many times has to be assessed by the court. Sometimes it goes to the DPP for criminal cases. So EACC cannot succeed or fall on their own in the fight against corruption. I do know that they have had some high-profile matters which they have taken to court. And for those matters, they deserve to be complimented. But there have also been matters that have gone before EACC and have just collapsed there in the mire of corruption, investigation, back and forth with the DPP's office. So Kenyans are watching, and we are not completely satisfied with the performance of EACC in some of the matters that have gone to the EACC. Okay. And we also know that there has been a bit of confusion between the role of EACC and the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, because they seem to have concurrent mandates on corruption investigations, and that is also a matter of concern. But Kenyans are saying we need to see a clear scorecard for the EACC, and they need to give us reports showing how many cases they've taken to court, how many convictions they have got, how much of public property they have recovered, and so on. So far, we are not yet satisfied, and I think the jury is still out on the effectiveness of EACC.
All right.
Just to make an observation, what my learned senior, Mr. Kanjama, has observed. Yes, I agree there is the presumption of innocence as prescribed by the Constitution, but we are looking at a very unique crimes here, the crimes, economic crimes. In my understanding and in my view, the economic crimes are what we call the sui generis. They belong to their own category. And that's why you can see even the Act prescribes very harsh penalties. For example, the best example to give would be the Waluke's case. So when we are why am I saying it is sui generis and a special crime? Because most of the persons involved, those guys who are culpable, are the ones who are actually in public service. So these guys have been hiding behind the presumption of innocence, saying, I am innocent until I'm proven guilty. I think it's a high time we lift the veil by saying, we have a serious legal classification of crimes of corruption and economic crimes, so that these guys will not be hiding behind the veil of presumption of innocence whenever they are called to account. That is why we are not able to wash clean our public institutions.
And what would be the point of that? That they immediately step aside, or what?
Sorry?
What would be the point of that distinction you're making? That they immediately step aside? Are you saying that because they have presumption of innocence that they continue to,
yes,
be in office and influence investigations, or what's your point?
The presumption of innocence dictates that you cannot, even the issues of being called upon to step aside, is just a judicial innovation. And the judicial innovation has come as a result of the quagmire where we find ourselves by the operation of the law. So I'm just proposing that we need to be much more innovative when we are dealing with the crimes against corruption or crimes, economic crimes, so that guys will not be hiding behind the veil of presumption of innocence anytime they are called upon to give their accounts.
Kenyans are rightly outraged at the allegations of impropriety that continue to dog what is now known as Mafia House and Kemsa. Political parties like ODM have been quick to release puzzling comments over the saga. I'd like your take, I'll start with you, Charles, on these developments. Should ODM have waded in?
I don't think that the statement that was made by the Secretary General of ODM, Edwin Sifuna, who's a lawyer, like myself and my colleague Njiru, was really an appropriate statement. I think given the context, that statement seems to have given comfort to those who are being investigated, as opposed to add some salt to the fire or some flame to the fire of encouraging the investigators to do a quick job. And I think it is also problematic when procedural issues like who should investigate first, is it the Auditor General, is it the EACC or the DCI, are brought in to sometimes obscure the fact that the investigation has to be done as quickly as possible, and that there is no procedural bar to investigative agencies beginning investigation, even as other processes go on. So I think the statement by ODM was not ideal in the circumstances. I think Kenyans are rightly outraged or disappointed by ODM's statement. Personally, I should say that ODM as an opposition party should be the first to hold government to account when such kind of allegations.
You're still calling it that, an opposition party?
ODM is officially an opposition party. In Parliament, they have the leader of opposition.
But in practice, in reality, you know that's not the case.
Well, you see, they have started saying they are both an opposition and a ruling party, which is a contradiction in terms that the Constitution did not contemplate. They need to decide where they stand. If they are an opposition party, then they have to behave as such. If they believe they are in government, then they should resign from their positions as head of the opposition in Parliament and relinquish those roles to another party or another group of coalition of political parties that can perform the role. It's very crucial that Parliament, which is one of the key oversight institutions in our constitutional architecture, plays its role, especially by having robust opposition political parties that can question the executive. And even the members of the ruling party in Parliament have to perform their role of oversight, notwithstanding the fact that the head of state or the cabinet is drawn from people who are in their political alignment.
Right. Let me ask you this, Njiru, because you prosecuted graft, you're prosecuting alleged graft right now. You know, you can't separate politics from it, because in many times, especially in, you know, the kind of corruption that reels in private sector, and President Kenyatta has separately decried that and said private sector also has, you know, a case to answer when it comes to perpetuating graft within government. You know that these two are Siamese twins, business interests and political interests. Going now into what is unfortunately shaping up to be, you know, a possible battle royale for the succession of President Uhuru Kenyatta, and of course the very big political and business interests which sort of weave into each other. How do you see politics affecting the ability for prosecutors to go as they would hopefully, presumably, want to go after corruption suspects from private sector or indeed from politics?
That's an interesting question, Anne, because despite the fact that we keep on saying legally that our institutions are independent, for example, the institution of the DPP, which the law says that it shall not act under the direction of any other person, in reality, that is not the actual thing that ordinarily takes place or happens. We have seen that some prosecutions are instigated politically, others are just killed politically. And then you ask yourself where the presumption of independence all goes when it comes to the execution of the functions of those particular offices. And that calls upon us Kenyans and to ensure that we build strong institutions that will survive the political environment and they will endure the political storm.
What does that mean? Well, people say that all the time, build strong institutions. What does that mean exactly? What have these institutions not been given? And again, I just want to reference what President Kenyatta has said, you know, I believe at the corruption conference that was at State House, and he was saying, what have you not been given in terms of resources? Can anybody say that you have been limited in any way from carrying out your functions? Presumably, and even in as far as the public is concerned, none of these institutions have come up to say, oh, we feel weak or disenfranchised in this or other manner that should, you know, stop us from carrying out our mandate.
You know, building strong institutions, in my view, does not necessarily mean that because we have given you some good budgetary allocation, you are independent. Even the individuals serving in those offices requires to go a complete metamorphosis, to divorce themselves from the political influences. That is how strong institutions in a democracy are built. But we still have a big problem in this country, Anne, because we keep on blaming the political class for the O's in embezzlement and misuse of public finances and resources. But we forget that we have a dysfunctional civil service. A civil service that is not responsive to the purpose for which the same was created. For example, you look at the Kemsa case. The Kemsa case has actually been orchestrated by individuals who are employees, who are public servants within that particular organization. Simply because those guys are shielded by the political class. So we are quick to call upon Minister Mutahi Kagwe to resign. But then the question is, after the resignation of Mutahi Kagwe today, how do we cleanse that process? How do we cleanse the offices that have been left behind? How do we cleanse the individuals who issued these tenders? For example, Anna would say that in a political process, we always refresh and cleanse our political class within a period of 5 years. After every 5 years, we are refreshing. But we leave behind the same public service, which is not civil, which has failed to divorce itself from the political perspective. And those are the problems that we are having and affecting and eating into the independence of the institution that we are talking about.
All right. I just want to bring you in, Charles, on that, and again to pick on specifically on the role of private sector in abetting corruption, and of course the fact that people in some ways may be, you know, touchy-feely about going after private sector, because it really does represent what we would call in our context big business and big interest. And yet even in Kemsa you have members or membership that stand in some ways accused of possible impropriety. So what is the challenge in dealing with private sector and holding business accountable also for, you know, where they perpetuate corruption?
There should be no challenge, Anne, in holding the private sector to account.
But there is.
In fact, I would say that many times when you find the people in charge of fighting corruption dealing with private sector players with kid gloves, it's probably because those private sector players are disguising public sector individuals who are now disguised as private sector, and therefore there is some conflict of interest. And the people investigating know this. So that is one of the challenges that we have. But the average private sector player that does not have connections find themselves actually on the short end of the stick, where sometimes they feel that they are being unduly harassed. You've seen what has been happening with Keroche breweries and their big battle with KRA in the courts and so on. That private sector actually sometimes feel that they don't have as much protection as public sector, unless you have public sector people or connected people to public sector that are in that private sector institution. So again, if there is a failure to deal with corruption in the case of private sector, the blame is at the door, is at the foot of the institutions that are meant to tackle graft, like EACC, DCI, ODPP, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. What do you think the problem is?
They're waiting for orders? They're waiting for a phone call?
I think the biggest challenge we have in Kenya is a cultural problem. We have an overabundance of laws to fight corruption. The budget has been slowly growing, although it is nowhere near enough. We have been recruiting more people in these institutions. It is nowhere near enough. We are hearing the rhetoric about the fight against corruption. Mind you, this rhetoric has been there since the days of Daniel Moi, I recall. So we've had rhetoric for the last 30, 40 years about fighting corruption, but the fruits, you measure the effort and the sincerity with the fruits. The fruits have been slow in coming. So clearly there is something that needs to be done. And allow me to say that there is a saying that an institution or a country, when you are fighting corruption, is like fish. It rots from the head. And also, if you want to fight corruption, you have to start from the top. If you fight corruption, what is called low-level corruption, and you don't fight grand corruption or corruption that affects senior people in government, then people learn from example that you're not being serious. So I think our biggest challenge is that the big fish find it easy, all too easy, to escape. And sometimes it is because there's lack of effective commitment. Sometimes it is poor strategy. There have been lawyers, including myself, who sometimes criticize the DPP for loading so many accused persons in cases with dozens of witnesses. Those cases take too long to be dealt with. You have dozens of lawyers in one criminal case. It becomes difficult to get a conviction.
Is that poor strategy by default or design?
I don't know whether it is by default or design, because I cannot read the minds of the prosecutors, but those who have engaged, those who have engaged sometimes seem convinced that their strategy is going to work. But I do recall that even the Chief Justice and senior judicial officers have cautioned the DPP to be careful about the strategy he adopts, because it has to be a strategy that takes into account the resources and the processes in the judicial system. We have been complaining, for example, as lawyers through our professional body LSK, that the government gives very little budget to the judiciary. If you are serious about fighting corruption, why would the budget of the judiciary as a percentage of the total revenue of the country be falling consistently in the last 5 or 6 years of this government? It doesn't seem to make sense. It has to be increasing. So a real commitment to the fight against corruption has to affect all the institutions in the value chain of fighting corruption, from the police who investigate, EACC, DPP, the courts, and of course other institutional players. And I think in the private sector you have organizations like Kemsa, Kenya Private Sector Alliance, that have said that we are keen as private sector on supporting government in the fight against corruption, because it makes the cost of doing business very high. So really the people benefiting are just a few, while the majority public are suffering. Right. So it has been a continuous story, and we need to go beyond a story and you could say some token cases where we say we are fighting corruption, we've taken this person to court, to see results consistently.
Right. I just want to wind up very quickly on this corruption thing and then throw one political question at you both. And you'll beg my pardon, I can't help myself. Whilst it is easy to look at Kemsa and the ministry, we've also had, we have rather very clear public procurement guidelines and the authority. Why is this missing in the discussion of what is happening at the Ministry of Health, Njiro?
I think the Act gives some or create some scenarios where direct procurement can be done when we are in a situation like we find ourselves in, that we're not able to undergo through the whole process of procurement, the protocol, the procurement protocol. And then we needed some of these essentials quite fast, and then that's why the law gives some leeway that procurement can directly be done. But the unfortunate thing is that the persons who are now doing or granted that mandate by the law to do this direct procurement, then they take it as an advantage to abuse that process and that privilege. So and I agree with my learned friend Mr. Kanjama that we have a cultural problem, that the person who has been mandated to procure, say the PPEs or the sanitizers or anything that was to be appropriated towards dealing with this COVID-19, they have actually taken it as an opportunity for them to steal. We do not have the patriotism that is contemplated in our Constitution under Article 10, that we require to have very high level of patriotism. We require to realize that we are procuring these PPEs to save our fellow Kenyans. You know, it's as if those guys who are stealing from Kemsa are not residents of this republic, and that as if stealing the PPEs will not affect their neighbors, will not affect their cousins, their relatives, and all that stuff. So we are
will not affect them.
Yeah, this individualism is what is actually killing us. That I want to amass as much wealth as I can. Why? Because even the public sector itself has failed. How many times do we do audit of personal audit? How many times do we say, Anne, you came to this media house with X?
Nothing.
And you are living with Z?
Nothing again.
How many times do we do this?
Nothing
audit?
Twice. We don't do it enough. I'm poking fun, but you're right. There has to be that audit, and I'm sorry because I can see I'm out of time.
If you go to, I hear there are some guys in Kirinyaga County who are now serving under that government of Kirinyaga County. Right. Some of them are just mere employees, chief finance officers or something, an employee. But he has a lot of properties in Thika and elsewhere. Then we ask ourselves, is this commensurate to the salary that you, that you earn? So even the EACC should not just deal with the question of just arresting individuals, kuvamia nyumba za watu asubuhi. They should also do some audit of individuals. The properties that we have in Nairobi, the properties that we have in Murang'a or elsewhere, let's have audit done on them. How are these procured? Who has procured these? Where were you working? So that then we tell the public thieves that at the end of the day, even if you steal and go and buy a property, we shall still do audit. And as I sum up, I hear you say that we are short of time.
Yes,
we also have a challenge as our young generation. I'm saying that our grandfathers fought for independence to redeem this country. Our fathers, led by the Matibas and the rest, fought for multi-party democracy to have the government that we have today. What is our generation doing today? What is our generation doing today to perfect what our fathers have been doing?
Right.
Or are we just stealing from the government that our fathers fought for? It's a challenge that this generation has to do. We have to do self-introspection and ask ourselves, when we are long gone, what will our children remember us for?
Wow, what a note to end it on. I'll just try and sneak in a quick one here on politics. We've seen newspaper reports suggesting that part of what could come up in a referendum would be the possible extension of term for members of parliament and then indeed the executive for one more year. Your thoughts, Charles, very quickly on that?
I think it is a really, really, really bad idea. And I think the people of Kenya will react very, very, very strongly to any attempt for extension of term. Those who have monitored or taken part in the struggle for multi-party democracy and for leveling the playing field from the time of the struggle for multi-party democracy in the 1980s until today, 30 years, we know that the first linchpin of securing democracy in Kenya was to ensure that presidential term limits are limited to 2. There is no gerrymandering on that issue, that we have regular elections every 5 years. And so I think any person who supports this proposal to increase the term, for whatever reason, should be marked by Kenyans. And those should be the first people we wake up at 8:30 to vote out of office. And of course, if that attempt does succeed in Parliament, I do believe that lawyers and other well-wishing Kenyans are going to take the matter to the courts, because we will not accept an attempt to amend the Constitution that way. And we also do know that under the Constitution, any attempt to extend the term of the president requires a referendum. And I would like to caution Kenyans of one thing that has been tried by other countries, in other countries, where you have leaders who mischievously want to bring in unpopular proposals in constitutional referendum. They find that this poison pill can best be swallowed if we cover it with nice, juicy, and nourishing and attractive foodstuff. So you give somebody a nice meal or drink, and you put there the poison pill. So this has happened in some of our neighboring countries, and I do know that there are probably going to be some very attractive proposals in the BBI package, like increasing the amount of devolution fund from 15 to 35% as a minimum. I'll tell Kenyans that there must be some irreducible minimums that they should look at. And if they find those irreducible minimums have not been respected, they should resist the temptation of swallowing something that appears tasty with a poison pill. Poison pill doesn't need to be much. It can be 1% of what you are swallowing, but it can kill you. We've seen how coronavirus, a very microscopic virus, can kill people. So let us not accept any attempt to extend the term of office of the parliamentarians. Democracy is one of the anchors and the pillars for our current constitutional setup, and we should not accept any attempt to fiddle around with it.
Njiru, 30 seconds.
And you know, I don't even think Kenyans are enthusiastic in going to another election because elections have yielded the same characters and the same results. Since time of Moi, we have done elections time and again. We have been complaining about the same plights. We have been complaining about bad education system, health sector collapsing, coffee collapsing sector, agricultural sector collapsing. So we are not enthusiastic in actually doing an election. What you should be enthusiastic about is putting into place a mechanism that will bring us good governance. Remember, Anne, elections have not yielded the expected results. For example, there are some good characters in this country who can make good presidents, who can make good MPs, who can make good senators, but they are always subjected to a very competitive and a very machinated process of elections. And we end up yielding and getting the bad character. So I'm asking myself, is it the time that we then think of redefining another system in which we can use to constitute government? For example, we say, Anne, we see you are good to become the president of this republic. We install you. I think we need to have a process of installing now. And we have seen governments changing in our lifetime. We have seen Mali changing the other time. We saw Zimbabwe changing. An individual who people perceived as good was installed. He was not installed through an election. So we need to define a mechanism that we will end up yielding the kind of the good character individuals would want to have them to govern. Because when you subject good person and a bad person in a elective process that is competitive, we end up getting the bad results. So it's a high time that we Kenyans also think whether this so-called democracy is serving us right.
All right, we're out of time. I want to thank you both ending on a very thought-provoking note, Ndegwa Njiru and, of course, Charles Kanjama. I thank you both for your time, and earlier, Professor Kip Kurgat from River Tex, East Africa. That's our time. We'll see you next week here on Punchline. Catch us online. The hashtag is Punchline. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.